Moishe, you there?
I am here.
You look like a model.
So do you. We
Okay.
must be related.
We're live on Facebook.
Oh my God.
Hi to find, ladies and gentlemen, and everyone in between. Welcome to a rabbi and a producer walk into a Zoom. Thank you to my dear cousin, Moishe Rosenfeld, for joining me today
Thank you for inviting me.
for a look into a career that spans the theater and concerts and film worlds. And I figured we would start in the beginning. Um, Maybe you could tell us a little bit about your parents and your home growing up.
Sure. My parents, my mother was Sura. My father was Herschel. They met in Warsaw in the 2 years before they escaped from Warsaw right before the outbreak of World War II. And they were sweethearts, and they escaped right after the invasion with my father's siblings, Shmilka and Gutta. They escaped to Russia, to the Soviet Union. My mother had grown up in Warsaw in the Mlotek family. She was the youngest, and the youngest of that generation of siblings of the children of Zalman Mlotek, who was a Malamed who lived on Milla Street. And so uh, they, so I'll tell you about my mother. My mother grew up secular, even though the Bund, she grew up in the Bund, even though her father was religious. And all the siblings were more secular. And
Mm-hmm.
it seemed like in those days, in the 30s, in Warsaw, in Poland, there was a much more open relationship among, religious and secular Jews. And so there was you know, by the way, I'm getting my doorbell is ringing behind me, and there's no one to answer it.
That's excellent.
So that's really that's really pausing my brain from going back and
I
keeping.
remember reading with you.
Yeah,
I remember reading with you a selection from her memoirs,
yeah,
where she talks about the pride she felt with her of her own mother, who could, who knew all the tefillah, the prayers, that religious women would read, and she, right? Do you remember?
So yeah, absolutely, and she was her mother, had moved forward, from the world of Hasidism or whatever, and become more contemporary, and that probably allowed for her children to become socialists and communists and whatever they became, and in the crazy world of Warsaw of the 1930s. It was a crazy world of hustle bustle and conflict and fear and anti-Semitism and looming disaster from coming from Germany. And it was an insane world where family stayed central to everybody's lives and to their life in particular. And my mother was very attached to her family. She loved her family more than anything, and especially she was particularly in love with her niece, Esther's daughter, Libela,
Yeah.
who she adored. And so, yeah, that was the world. I mean, my mother went to, she would talk about going to see Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers, and just that image of, when you think about the Holocaust, you think about Stettlach, but not, you don't think about this cosmopolitan modern life with bustle and cars and Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers in their lives, and then suddenly it's all, that they're all put in ghettos and murdered
Did she talk to you about her life before the war?
not a lot. I mean, we've learned a lot from her writing. She didn't talk a lot about it, but I saw when growing up as a child, I would see pictures of. There was a picture of two of her, Libela and another nephew taken in the Warsaw Ghetto, and
Mm.
and that would be on her dresser, and a picture of her father and mother, and then there was a picture of a wedding in the Wars taken in the Warsaw Ghetto. And as a 4 and 5 year old, I would sit and stare at these pictures, knowing that these are people that these are my family that I would never meet, because I knew about the Holocaust right from the earliest days of my life, and my family was in those pictures, and it wasn't, and I was born in 1949. My mother escaped
Where were you born?
Warsaw in Montreal, and my mother escaped Warsaw in 1939, only 10 years earlier. My brother was born in 1945 at the very end of the war in Lodz. And so we're so in that world, so connected. Anyway, so I grew up in Montreal. We spoke Yiddish, of course, at home. My parents my father was a furrier, and my mother was a dynamo of a human being, an activist. She, right from the get go in Montreal, she created a choir and was the chair of the choir with all her landslide, friends, her dear friends who became kind of our extended family. Anya, who passed away last year, and Hannah, who's still alive at 101, Hannah
Wow.
Gonchar, and all her best buddies who she would speak to on the phone every single day, Yentl Fishman, and
Moishe,
just
you
one.
say you say you grew up speaking Yiddish, of course, and for me, I understand it's of course, and for those maybe in unsere Welt, in our bubble, it's of course, but maybe we can try but for a majority of people, there's a sense that obviously, right, that language, that world died along with the 6+ million. So
Yeah.
help help the viewers understand
So as
where
I was,
this.
yeah, of course. I mean, so this community was very young. These people that my mother spoke to in Yiddish every day, they were young. They were in their 20s and 30s. They had just survived the war. And they had all come to Montreal, and they were all part of the community. Yiddish was their language. Yiddish was the language of Jews in Poland. And but it wasn't just that they spoke Yiddish, it's that they threw themselves into the cause of making Yiddish, live and be preserved. Uh, and so choir, they were active in the workman's circle. They each had a branch that they belonged to in the workman's circle. They went to events at the Jewish Public Library in Montreal. Montreal was a very Yiddish centric Jewish community in general. I went to a day school called the Volksschule. It was the Jewish People's School. It was run by the Verband, labor Zionist organization, but it was the language of instruction for Jewish subjects was Yiddish.
Hmm.
So that was, and not everybody in my class came from Yiddish speaking homes, but we all needed to speak Yiddish to our teachers. And so
And it was a day school.
it was a day school. It was a day school. So I went there through seventh grade, and yeah, I mean, we had a choir. We would sing in Hebrew. We would sing in Yiddish, and we would learn four languages. We were all taught four languages: French, English, Hebrew, and Yiddish.
Wow.
And so Yiddish is, my name is Moishe. It's although in grade school it was Marvin. I have to be
Marvin.
honest about it. It was Marvin. The reason it was Marvin is that when I went to kindergarten, we went to this Protestant school board school across the street from our house on John Manson, Montreal. And the teacher in the kindergarten class said, "What's your name?" And my mother said, "Its name is Moishe." And the teacher said, "I'm sorry, he needs an English name." So, and I remembered when I was 3, there was this like bully guy on another street that we used to live on called Marvin. He was like, so I said, I'm Marvin. So, and it stayed with me all the way through school, through high school, until I came back to New York.
That never became your stage name, though.
No, Moishe is my stage.
My father tells me a similar story of when he was in, like, I don't know, first or second grade, and the teacher read on the roll calls Saul Malotek, and he said
Right.
my name's Zal, and he had to, like, in a quiet voice say, which kid wants to say their name, from the Bronx, their name is Zalman, but not, but
But didn't he go by Saul a little bit, just for a couple of years,
I don't
or was
know.
it just that one? I
I don't
think
know.
I remember him as a little bit having had Saul as we would kid about it. We would kid about Saul and Marvin.
So,
But,
tell me, so during the year you were in this day school and camp, were there camps that you went to as well? That
yes, yes. So at 10 years old, my parents brought me to uh, New York State, to Liberty, New York, in the Catskills, where we entered Camp Hemshech, the magical world of Camp Hemshech. So Camp Hemshech was created by Bundists, by Yiddish socialist survivors of the Holocaust, and Hemshech means continuity. And the Bundists understood that this is their opportunity for their children to carry on a very important and precious legacy of both Yiddish culture, Yiddish identity, and socialism and socialist identity, and which was central to their lives, central to their struggles. Many of them had been heroes of the resistance to the Nazis during the war, had been partisans. Shimka Palevsky and Chaim Palevsky were partisans in Vilna, and Solomensky was a hero of the Warsaw Ghetto, and Bolek Ellenbogen were heroes of the Warsaw
can
Ghetto
you
uprising. So I'm putting in a little bit of perspective that these young Bundes, young, I say 1959 was not that long after the war, and we were their children, and
Mhm.
so we had this camp went on for 20 years, and I went steadily for about 10 years after that. And this is where I formed my whole identity, my identity as a North American kind of radical, peacenik, where I fell in love with Bob Dylan and the Beatles and the Stones, and where I learned, you know, Yiddish culture, and to love the music, and to where I've played my first roles on the stage, and Lamed Peretz plays and things like that we did in camp. And it's also where I found my identity as a kind of a writer and a organizer of things, and a prankster. And camp was the place of intense humor, intense irony, brilliant young people coming of age, together. It was quite a magnificent place, and I hope somebody writes a book about Camp Hemshech, because it's unique,
I'm,
and
sh-
it's an incredibly powerful history
I'm
for
sure
the
there was
people.
also like an abundance of guidance counselors and psychologists that were on staff as they had you lead, reenact memorial sessions for the Churban and things like that.
We did every year. We had ghetto night, which
Uh-huh.
which young people from ages 10 to 19 getting together and remembering. So it was an extremely powerful and a
Mm.
beautifully written script, and it was in Yiddish and English, and we sang, ghetto songs and read poetry and recounted the horrors of the Holocaust and the heroism of the resistance to the Holocaust. And we all walked down to a big field where there was a denkmal, we had it was like a wall,
Mm-hmm.
created a small wall with a mural of a ghetto fighter and a heroic person with a gun and it was designed by Daniel Liebeskind,
Wow.
who was one of our campers and counselors and was our arts and crafts director. And Daniel went on, as many will know by recognizing his name, to design the Holocaust Museum in Berlin and many, many Holocaust museums around the world. And then the Freedom Tower in New York after the World Trade Center was shattered. So, yeah, we had Daniel Libeskind in our midst, and he was funny and young and impish, just like the rest of us. And it was
What's a prank that the kids of Holocaust resistance fighters and refugees and survivors would play on their counselors and each other? Lamushel.
well, LeMarchal. One day, we were CITs already. We were like 13 or 14, and we were counselors in training.
So you could drive the kids around already for trips, you know.
No, we weren't taking kids on trips. We were counselors in training. We were like CITs. We were
Okay.
older campers. Our voices were changing. I think we were like past puberty.
Yeah.
So we had a particularly mean streak in us, and so one day we were in town, and one of us noticed that people were signing people up for the draft. It was in the middle of the Vietnam War.
Oh my
We
God.
decided, let's draft Leon. Leon, our beloved counselor. Leon Kupferstein was one of the most amazing people in camp. He was an icon. He was an amazing basketball player and a wonderful. His parents are also from Warsaw, Yiddish speaking friends of the family. But Leon was a very handsome, a very funny man. And so we thought he would be able to take a joke. So we took it a little further than we needed to. We didn't send in an application. We did not do that. But
Okay.
when we got back to camp, we wrote a letter to him on letterhead, which was counterfeited by Daniel Libeskind from the Department of Defense, and it was signed by Robert McNamara, the Secretary of Defense. Dear Mr. Kupferstein, you are hereby drafted, and we need you to show up selected service in 1 week or for 3 days. I don't know what we said. We signed it, and we gotta get that stupid phone.
It's okay.
Anyways, let it ring.
Wow.
Okay. All right. So let me tell the rest of the story. So my aunt Dina was in charge of the office at the time. So she let us use the typewriter. She let us use the station. Anyway, so we had like really good, an eagle on top and the whole thing. It was amazing.
Wow.
And we put it in an envelope, and we counterfeited the postmark, and then somebody said "Oif Maksam, on the PA. Label Kupferstein, komm rein in Büro. Leon, please come to the office. He comes to the office, and he's handed this letter. So next 10 minutes, he's sitting outside the office on a bench, and his face is white. He's very, very worried, very, very pained look on his face. And we're just walking by. Hey, Leon, how you doing? Leon, want to play some basketball? He's just sitting there, his head is down, he's thinking what's gonna happen, Vietnam, this, that.
Terrible.
And then, but it didn't last that long. We weren't that cruel. We weren't that harmful.
Right.
An hour later, at the Haberschaft Versammlung, where everybody got together to hear the news, and our bunk started standing behind Leon, started singing, "You're in the army now." No, 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 no. And he realized he was pranked, and he started
Uh,
laughing, and he was so happy. I've never seen
hmm,
a happier person in my life at that
hmm.
moment when he realized it's not happening. So that's a prank that the
I
children.
didn't realize Dina, your aunt of Avram and Dina was in
Right.
the.
Yes.
So was the whole fam? Because I know that my father also went there. Was it like a whole family?
So
With
yeah, Dina and well, Ruthie came to Camp Hampshire. Ruth, my first cousin, your aunt, your cousin,
cousin?
um, uh, and Ida, my cousin from the other side, from my paternal side, and my cousins from Montreal. We had a huge clan in
Mm,
camp, and just Dina just came 1 or 2 summers to work in the office. She was the secretary at the Congress for Jewish Culture with Chaim Bez and at the Atran House in New York. So she took the summer a couple of times and came to camp. But yeah, we were very, and our family was just grew up in camp. Your uncle Moishe was in camp for a couple of years. He was a basketball star, as I recall, and I think this is where he met Audrey, and and this is where I met Annette, and so shidduchim and
how old were you
I
when you met Annette?
uh, so um, so I met Annette in camp, but we didn't couple up until much later,
Mm-hmm.
many years later. We actually met again at a it's all connected. We at a banquet for the Bund,
Hmm.
and we were sitting at the youth table, and then we met, and that was where we started to hang out. And uh, but camp was formative and transformative and cathartic for all of us who were there.
Mm-hmm.
It was a powerful experience, and it implanted this Bundist ethic of we had kids connected to Medgar Evers that came to camp the summer after Medgar Evers was murdered. And we someone said they were his kids, somebody
Wow.
else said they were his nieces, but somehow they were connected that through the Jewish Labor Committee they were sent to Camp Amshach where they spent
Hmm.
a few weeks. And so we were, and Daniel Liebeskind and Annette actually were at the March on Washington with where King gave in 1963, where he gave his "I Have a Dream" speech,
Hmm.
and so that was our
What
'60s.
a
Yeah,
what a world that generation
yeah,
built. Coming from the the utter destruction that they had experienced to then be able to rebuild and provide such a uh, such a robust cultural and people and language driven and values driven space for their kids is pretty
absolutely,
remarkable.
absolutely, and I have to say that that the dark humor, and the sense of humor and the need for humor in
Of
our
course.
lives was overwhelming. It was part of our daily oxygen. The
Mm-hmm.
most popular book in Camp Hemshech was Catch 22, which was
Wow.
just so ironically written with the same irony that we lived. And so we loved that. It was our Bible. We would
Mm-hmm.
quote from it, and we would act out scenes from it, and we would name each other, Major, 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 and all these iconic figures that Joseph Eller created that came to life for us. And yes, it was
How
necessary for us to just go into humor as a way of coping with our
How,
backgrounds. You know,
how many summers did you spend at Hemshech?
so
And when did you move to New York?
altogether 12 or 13, and it lasted till 1979.
Mm-hmm.
But I wasn't there till the very end, and I was there through like the early 70s. I do want to say a little bit more about Hamshach in one sense, is
Yeah.
where it's where your father and I became best friends,
Mm-hmm.
and where I saw your father's genius at the earliest age
Mm-hmm.
imaginable, where as a teenager he would get 120 kids singing and create programs for Sholem Sekunda and Lazar Weiner that you couldn't see such programs anywhere in the world with children singing Yiddish songs to these Yiddish songwriters. Sholem Sekunda, who wrote by Mir Shane, came and actually Sholem Sekunda, after he came to camp, wrote an article in the forward in Yiddish
Really?
right afterwards about it, and saying, and this was in 1970, I think, he wrote, und zu der jiddische Welt, halt an euch auf die zwei junge Leid, Zalman Mlotek and Moishe Rosenfeld.
Really?
Swear to God. It's in there. It's in the archive. Somebody can look it up
Wow.
and it was kind of prophetic because we went on to do some wonderful things together. But in camp, we created some wonderful things. In
Mm.
camp, it was he brought fiddler in Yiddish to Camp Hemshech. That was your father did that, and he
Mm.
took it off of the recording, and I played Tevye, and he directed Herschel Pola and all these shows as a teenager
Mm.
in Yiddish. I mean, it did come from the most incredible family. I'm not taking credit for that family, but your mother and father created this sense of this sense of creativity. They
My
had built
grandparents.
your grandparents, right?
Yeah.
Who had brought Yiddish into this dynamic place, that inspired Zalman, who was such a brilliant pianist, to embrace it and share it with the,
Mm.
the widest possible segments of the world throughout his life, but starting in Camp Hemshech.
How old were you when you played Tevye?
I think 18, 19,
Mm-hmm.
20, and something like eight. No, yeah. So,
And
yeah.
and so when did you move to New York? Did you go to college in Montreal or did
I
you?
did. I did. I did not graduate college. I went to McGill University for a couple of years, and then I switched over to Sir George Williams University for the third year. My those years were tumultuous, and it was very difficult for me to, as you know, I am legally blind, but I didn't really realize it at the time. I wasn't
Mm.
diagnosed, and I was an extremely slow reader and extremely so. Finishing courses was very difficult for me, so I didn't finish my university, and then so I came to New York in 1969, and here's the story. A few months before my first attempt to come to New York, there was a first attempt. Uh, I was in a play in Montreal with Ida Kaminska. Ida Kaminska was
Wow.
she was the mother of Yiddish theater. Well, her mother was the mother of Yiddish theater in general, Esther Rochel Kaminska. That's her title. But Ida took over the role, inherited the role, and ran the Esther Rochel Kaminska Theater in Warsaw from after the war until the mid 1960s. In
Mm.
the mid 1960s, Ida became an international star when she starred in a movie called A Shop on Main Street, a
Mm.
Czechoslovakian film about a Holocaust survivor. In Montreal, I got a call from your grandfather, my beloved Uncle Yossel, who said, Moishe, they're coming to Montreal. They're looking for someone to play Shloimola. Would you be interested? And I said, of course. And I went to meet with Harold Leventhal, who was um, the producer of the event. And he came to scout out the theater and to cast the role of Shloimola, the grandson, in the play Mirala Ephros. I met so Harold Leventhal, just to drop a few names, was the manager of Woody Guthrie,
Mm.
Arlo Guthrie, and Judy Collins and Pete
Wow.
Seeger. So Harold Leventhal is a legend of the folk music world, and I got to meet him, and oh my God, I can't believe I sat in a room with him and just
Mm.
chatted, and then I did this play with Ida, and at the Place
In
des Arts
Montreal.
in Montreal. It was called it was Mirala Ephros by Gordon, and it was a classic play. It was like a Jewish Queen Lear,
Mm.
and uh, and it was at the Place des Arts, the most magnificent theater. Here, the last thing I did on the stage was in Camp Hemshech. So here I'm on this magnificent theater. I had my own dressing room with a shower. It was pretty incredible, and the play was wonderful. I got to learn. I got to meet all these actors from New York, these Yiddish theater people who had been stars decades earlier.
Mm.
Here were playing extras. They were playing people sitting around the table. They played tiny roles.
Wow.
Chaim Tauber, who actually wrote Motel the Operator,
Mm.
was one such person. I mean, amazing, amazing,
Wow.
amazing. So, but after like three or four performances, the attendance dropped. It was a gigantic theater, and then I came to the theater and I learned that Ida had a heart attack,
Mm.
and so they canceled the run. So I was going to tour with them. It was everything was going to
Wow.
be, my life was all set. So I went to visit her in the hospital, where she said, my kin, yeah, I'm so happy we met you. When I go back to New York, we're starting a Yiddish theater, and it's going to be a national Yiddish theater, and I would like you to come to New York and be part of this theater. What a
Wow.
covet to hear that, you know. I'm getting a little emotional even remembering that.
Yeah.
But I was a little bit, self-conscious about it, and I wasn't sure, maybe I'd put one over on everyone, maybe I wasn't up to it, whatever. So I went to Dora Wasserman. Dora Wasserman, my dear friend who ran a Yiddish drama group in Montreal, who had been a student of Shlomo Mechoels, the Russian Yiddish theater legend who had been murdered by Stalin. So Dora was my dear friend. I loved her so much. She was like like a second mother,
Mm.
and I had been in plays with her, and with her daughter Bryna, and she and I had been in a play together a few years earlier. And I said to her, Dora, I had this invitation from Ida to come to New York, and I just need you to tell me, do, should I go? Do I have it in me? And she said, yes, go.
Mm.
And that was it. So
How old were you?
19.
Wow.
And so my first attempt to go to New York was pretty stupid. I got a one-way bus ticket. I had about $40 in my pocket, and Harold Leventhal still owed me a week's wages, so I was gonna, it was a few months later, so I was gonna just stay with my friend Norman in New York for a little bit and get a job and start working and start, so I was, and I went. So at the border, which is like 45 minutes from Montreal, a guy comes on, the border person, the immigration guy comes on the bus, and he's like asking people for their information. And he says to me, what's your name? Marvin Rosenfeld. Where are you going? I'm going to New York. Can I see your ticket? Oh, it's a one-way ticket. Aren't you coming back? Yeah, I said, oh, no, no, I'm going to stay there and try and get work. He says, yeah, you try to get work. Do you have a work permit? we have any? I said, no, no, I'll get it. He said, "Yeah, follow me." So I wasn't really grown up yet. I really wasn't very mature. I wasn't very smart either. And they put me on a bus back to Montreal. And then about a month or two later, uh, another relative, not a blood relative, but through marriage, Monya Pet, who was also a Bundesleader, who was a doctor. He was in Montreal visiting with his son Avram, who was also became a theatrical director and actor in klezmer and lives in Vermont. Avram and Manya were driving back, and I said, "Can you try and get me in?" So I wasn't supposed to go because I think I was put on a list not to come for 6 months, but this was really
They
not.
smuggled you across the border.
They did. They did. It was so it's different when you're on the bus alone
Right.
or when you're in the back seat of a doctor driving, his cousin.
Wow.
So yeah, that's when I came to New York, and Ida Kaminska had started her theater at the Roosevelt Auditorium down on 17th Street near
Mm-hmm.
Square, and she had a play called "The Bäume starben ständig," "The Trees Die Standing" by a Spanish playwright, and it was not going very well. They were, there were probably a dozen people on stage, and when I went, there were about four people in the theater. So 3-to-1 ratio, actors to
Right.
audience. So that ended, and then they did Mirala Efros again, and I think this time I was graduated to the role of Donya, the son, with the second son, and so that was my beginning, and that was in 1970, the beginning of 1970, and I have to say that being in the theater, being in New York, being in Union Square, being near 14th Street at the time in 1970, 14th Street was what probably what it looked like in 1930.
Mm.
The architecture, there was nothing, there was no construction going on there. It was all from, and there was the Horn and Hardart cafeteria, and there were the pool halls.
Mm.
I forget the name of the pool hall, but I used to go to it. And then I would go to 14th Street to the cafeteria with the ushers in the Yiddish theater.
Mm.
The ushers were members of the Yiddish Theater Ushers Union.
Mm.
Can you believe that there was a Yiddish Theater Ushers Union?
Amazing.
And they were amazing people. They were funny. There's one guy, Jaime, who was a Litvak, and hello, 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 Moishe, 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 hello, hello, hello. I never forget him. I
Wow.
never forget him. And these are etched in my memory. Most amazing people. And this was the world of Yiddish. This was Yiddish land, New York. It was like, and you could go all day just speaking Yiddish because the community was so vast. But it was getting older, and
Mm-hmm.
it wasn't to last. So, and after that, I stayed in Yiddish theater for a few years. I went to the Volksbühne to do a few wonderful productions with Jacob Ben-Ami, who was a big matinee idol in his youth, and Berta Gersten, his lover, who they had been married to other people for many years and had an affair, and then finally got together, for the last 10 years of their lives. And I was so privileged to be with them in this play, the Isaac Bashevis Singers, in my Tatten's Besdenstedt, my father's court. And actually, there's so much to tell.
Did
And then, yeah.
I was so, because you also made a foray into film too. Was that before or after the plays you and my dad wrote and put together?
It was simultaneous, before and after. I think the first major film I got in, first film I did actually was a film with Brian Watson in Canada called The People of the Book for
Mm.
the National Film Board of Canada. Don't rent it. Then, but the first major feature happened when I was um, my roommate was dating a young woman named Karen Taylor, and her first cousin was Juliet Taylor, was the casting director for Woody Allen.
Mm.
And Karen arranged an interview, and I went to this interview, met Juliet, and she said, "Oh, come on in." And I walk into this big apartment on 57th Street, and Woody Allen is sitting there, and I say, and Woody Allen says, uh, "Hello, how are you?" Juliet says, "You'd be perfect for the role. Nice to meet you. Thank you."
That was it.
It was about 15 seconds. So thank you. Goodbye. So I leave, and on my way out, as I'm going to the elevator, Juliet runs out. "He loved you." 15 seconds. So I was cast in Midsummer Night's Sex Comedy with it was amazing, and it was shot.
Mm.
My scenes were shot at Columbia University a few months later. A lot of things
Wow.
happened in between, and big things, connected to it. Like Woody Allen's chauffeur picked me up. The total coincidence on Fifth Avenue. I'm going to the East Side. I don't know if he picked me up or I just got into the yellow limo thinking it's a cab. I don't know how it happened, but I was in the back seat of Woody Allen's limo going to the West Side, and the driver is playing music, like surround sound music. I'd never heard that before. I said, "Wow, that music is incredible." "Yeah, my boss put in like quadrophonic sound." I said, "Who's your boss?" I said, "Woody Allen." I said, "You're kidding me. I'm in a movie with Woody Allen next week." He said, "Are you kidding me? I've never picked anybody up before." So anyways, so I was in that, and then I was in Sophie's Choice, and then I was in Crossing Delancey,
Mm.
and I was in what's the one with Once Upon a Time in America? No, I wasn't in that. I was cast in Once Upon a Time in America with Robert De Niro,
Mm.
and I got paid for it, but I never went. They cast somebody else. They shot it in Europe.
Wow.
Avalon. I was in Avalon, uh, and
Wow.
yes, I was in
Did,
all those movies and throughout the '80s and '90s, throughout the '80s, whatever. Right. And the plays that your father and I did together began in 1982, and they continued till 1990. The three plays that we did were The Golden Land on Second Avenue, and Those Were the Days, which Eleanor Risa directed, and for which Eleanor Risa was nominated for a Tony Award because it was on Broadway. And yeah, and the Golden Land had many, many, many iterations and repeats and revivals over the years. So it had a lot of
mm.
nachas from that production, the Golden Land, and ended up naming my company Golden Land Concerts and Connections because of that. So, and there's much to tell about those experiences as well, but yeah, lots and lots of stuff. But one play that I didn't get into, one movie that I didn't get into was Yentl. And
Mm.
why I mention it is that I did happen to be at two really important readings with Barbara Streisand of the script in the
Well,
offices of Sis Corman in Manhattan. And I was able to sit through the piece and hear for the first time. She said, "You're the first group to ever hear this music by
wow.
Michel Legrand." So we heard the score at these readings. And at one reading, the part of the boyfriend was read by Kevin Kline. And at the second one, it was Mandy Patinkin. And we got
Wow.
the, yeah, it was pretty
Did you ever
incredible.
tell Mandy that you were sort of up for the same role years later when you worked with him in Yiddish? For what
You
he.
know what? It didn't occur to me that tell him that we had been together in that reading. But Mandy and I had another, you know, really, I mean, Mandy and I have many interesting, like experiences together and people in common. One that I want to mention is Debbie Friedman.
Mm,
So Debbie Friedman, for people who don't know who Debbie Friedman was, I don't think many Jewish Americans don't know who Debbie Friedman was, but Debbie was the, the songwriter of the Jewish Reform revival of the 1980s and 90s, 70s, 80s, 90s, right? And
mm,
into the 2000s. She wrote so many important, iconic songs and prayers and healing songs and things that became part of the liturgy, not just in the Reform movement, but the entire Reform movement, but also in the conservative movement. And so she became really, really a superstar in that world. And I met Debbie by accident. I was at a Cage conference with Achinoam Nini, another artist that I've worked with forever and whom I love deeply. Achinoam Nini was an Israeli uh, singer songwriter who is still. I still work with her and I still love her and I still, can't wait till
mm,
she comes back to the States. Anyways, Debbie, I'm sorry, this is so easy to go like here and there and here and there. But Debbie was at a concert of Noah's in Bloomington, Indiana, at a Cage conference. So I was introduced to her, and I went to see her concert in Cage, Debbie's concert. I hadn't known anything about her, and I watched this concert, and I watched the audience sing along and be moved to tears, and
mm,
cantors line up, cantors from major synagogues all over the country line up to walk on stage at her beck and call, to just
mm,
sing in the aisles and sing on stage with her and to be with her. Debbie was a force. Debbie was magnificent. She was such she radiated light. She radiated light, brightness, humor. And then, so one day, and I produced Debbie at Carnegie Hall. I became her agent. We worked together. We became very close, really close. I loved her to the depths of my soul. And, but I was never religious, and which she understood. And but she was religious in the way that you are religious in the way that it just is, her neshama was
mm,
religion. Her neshama was Judaism, was God.
mm,
So you couldn't resist Debbie Friedman as a human being. It was
mm,
impossible. So at one concert, I mean, there were many concerts. So the second concert, I invited Mandy, and he sat in my box, and he had never seen Debbie before, just like I
mm,
had never seen her before Cage. And at the end of the concert, he says to me, "I never knew. I just didn't know." And I brought him backstage, and they met, and they became friends. And then Debbie did Mandy's son's bar mitzvah up in his estate up in the Catskills,
mm,
beautiful estate. I was at the bar mitzvah also, and she officiated, and
mm,
we drove home together from there. And then years later, Debbie and I had a little bit of a falling out at one point. There was, it's a crazy long story, but we came back together about a year before she passed away. And thank God we came back together. We wrote love notes to each other about how we
mm,
missed each other, and we were. I was her agent again, and at the time she passed away, I had more bookings for her than I had had in a decade.
wow.
It was going to be a magnificent year for her. So fast forward a few years, and And again, I didn't realize how Mandy and Debbie had stayed friends all this time. But it turns out that they were so close that
Hmm.
Mandy had advised her not to go to Europe, and Mandy had been in touch with her until the very last breath.
Hmm.
And he told me that years later, he came to see a performance of The Golden Land at Baruch College, and we took the subway uptown together, Mandy and I,
Hmm.
and we talked to. He told me about this, and I was so moved. First of all, that I had brought them together in the first place, and second of all, that she had him, till the end.
Right.
That was really, really, and that he had her in his life.
Hmm.
Just such moving stuff, from I'm telling you. Anyway, so yeah, so that and my work with Mandy, uh, another introduction by your father. He had been working with him on Yiddish, and he didn't have the time to put in there. And I lived on the same block. Mandy lived on 90th Street, and I lived on 90th Street. And I would go to him every morning and work on
Hmm.
his Yiddish. And, and we put Mama Lushan together. And I brought your grandparents to his house to just have them listen to him do the Yiddish, and they were so enamored with him, and he with them. He was in love with them. I introduced Mandy to Seymour Rechtside, and
Hmm.
also just enormous impact on him and on Seymour. Because as people are transitioning, from this part of their life to another part of their life, each experience takes on a different kind of deep depth and significance, like passing the
Hmm.
torch, those kinds of things. And we went to Seymour's house, which the walls were filled with pictures of Yiddish theater and pictures of his beloved Miriam, another beloved person in my life that I did her biography for the Women's Jewish Encyclopedia.
Hmm.
uh, Miriam Crescent,
Person.
an amazing human being. But Seymour himself was an amazing human being. Anyway, so introduced Mandy to Seymour. And so he got, in doing Mama Lushan, he got to be with, Yiddish legends.
Right.
He got to be with Yossel and Chaim Lotek. He got to be with Seymour Rechtside. He got to inculcate himself with their vibes, with their neshamas. And that showed, and he got to be, he was inspired by Joe Papp to do it.
Hmm.
And I remember at the last recording session, with a full orchestra. He had a full orchestra, and he brought everybody together, the orchestra and everybody. The head of None Such Records
Hmm.
was there, and really, really an amazing gathering of forces in the business. He brought everybody together inside the studio and broke down in tears. And he says, "I dedicate this last session and my album to my beloved Joe Papp."
Hmm.
And Joe Papp, who had created a Yiddish theater of his own at the Public Theater, with Avi Hoffman and Miriam Hoffman and Eleanor. So Joe Papp discovered Yiddish
Right.
late in his life, and he made sure that Mandy Patinkin would carry it on,
Hmm.
and he did, and so being witness and being part of it and being in that world has been, the most enriching, I mean, they're memories of tremendous emotion, but they're
Hmm.
they're very inspiring memories, and they're vivid memories, all of them.
It's you're such a connector of people, Mandy and Debbie being an example, but on all the different projects that you were in, of bringing different creative, talent together into
Yeah,
different communities. Now that's, a lot, I imagine, of your work with with bookings and with the with the Golden Land concerts
Bookings?
of like
Bookings? What's bookings? Concerts? What's concerts? What's an audience?
it's but it's I guess my last sort of question,
Okay.
comment before we conclude. As you think back to like the living room sort of and choruses of your mother and the world that's sort of they introduced you to in Hemshech and that you then immersed yourself into in New York. Do you see what's the like the common thread or is there a link that
Of
carries
course, of course, of course. One common theme when I was young is that we're in this community. It's a vibrant community, but it's like we were kind of not in the mainstream. We
right?
were kind of like separate from the rest of the Jewish world, which was very, very invested in building Israel and in identifying with Israel culturally, so that there was a big effort, well, as I was growing up, to sideline Yiddish in favor of Hebrew becoming the Jewish language, the modern Jewish language. And there were many slights and many insults, that emanated from that towards Yiddish. And so there was a period of time in my life where Yiddish was declining. And
Mm-hmm.
as it was declining in interest and importance and whatever, as it was declining, I stayed inside it. It was
Mm-hmm.
still the theater expression that I was involved with. It was still my creative world. I was still, the radio guy on WEBD in Yiddish every day. And it was still I had all of that happening while Yiddish was going slightly, the Yiddish speakers were moving to Florida or they were dying,
Mm-hmm.
natural Yiddish speakers. But in the midst of it all, um, you know, there was the sense that it's too magical, it's too deep, it's too important, a part of the Jewish identity, uh, to go into obscurity. And it
Mm-hmm.
won't. It won't. Because one day, and it's happened in the last 10 years, in the last 20 years with the klezmer revival and with the explosion of Yiddish courses around the world, and with the massive amount of young people who are identifying with their grandparents' language and their great grandparents' language for the first time. It says, yeah, Yiddish is Judaism. Yiddish is a, it's a way, we communicate. So even, can I just? Uh, I'm not going to. I was going to tell you.
Well, I was gonna say for those, it's you're like a treasure trove, Moishe, of so many different stories, and your recall of names alone is like incredible. And there's so many names that we haven't talked about that I know that you're
Many, many,
connected
many, many.
of Ella Fitzgerald and Shlomo Neshama Kalbach and and just
Yitzhak Perlman.
Yitzhak Perlman and
Yeah.
so I would just want to say people should follow my cousin on Facebook because you occasionally post these vignettes of memories that of these all these different worlds intersect.
Can I do a commercial? Quick
Yeah,
commercial.
quick plug.
At
Let's go.
2:30 today, Yemen Blues, which is the most amazing band in the world, is having its first ensemble performance live streamed from Tel Aviv, 2:30 New York time. At Facebook, Yemen Blues on Facebook. Find their page. It's going to be
Amazing.
a big band concert. Come join it. Tell everybody about it. It's got to be we want it to be a global event with many viewers, because it's a big turning point in Israel when an ensemble can play in front of an audience for the
Yeah.
first time since the pandemic hit.
Thank you, Moishe. Thanks for your time, and you should
Avram,
stay
thank you so much.
shepherdish and creative, and just thank you for your stories and who you are.
And thank you, Avram, for being Avram Latek, the most wonderful, wonderful person in the world. Thank you.
Okay,
Okay.
love you. Sei gesund.
Love you too.